Welcome to part 1 video presentation on Chapter 15. Chapter 15 as a whole deals with social, ethical, and legal issues in the context of IT management and IT leadership, and part 1 is a conceptual, high-level introduction to this topic. As you all well know, IT is influencing societies across the globe. Now, a lot of that impact is a positive one. You've read about IT being used to automate certain routine transactions within organizations, speeding up organizational processes. You also know that IT has enabled inexpensive, effective communication across department units and pretty much across the globe. So there are many positive influences that information technology has had on the societies across the globe. But despite all those benefits, there are also a number of negative social impacts of information technology. And I would argue that none of those negative impacts is unique to information technology. However, information technology made those issues even worse in the digital era. The first issue that IT often gives birth to is the loss of personal privacy and identity theft. Nowadays, it's relatively easy to invade somebody's privacy through technological tools. Here I'm talking about spyware, or just IT tools specifically developed for monitoring employee interaction with a network or with a particular information system. Identity theft has become an issue because whenever you use internet for certain transactions, let's say for purchasing something, you're leaving traces, and those traces, once picked up by software, they can be used to steal your identity and use your identity to apply for a loan or a credit card. Increase intellectual property violations. In the digital era, most of the assets, most of the goods that are produced are digital, and as you well know, those digital goods are very easy to copy and distribute. And this can be a positive trend, but unfortunately, a lot of people, they copy and distribute digital content in violation of the original policies in relation to who owns that content and how it should be distributed. Email spam. Again, it's something that is not unique to the field of information technology, because before email spam there was this regular spam through regular mail, but nowadays email spam is becoming a big problem to the point where people just stop using emails because they're just receiving so many emails. It's impossible to cut through all this information. Then we have a number of security issues. For example, computer viruses and worms. They can destroy data on personal as well as corporate computers, or make an authorized copy of this digital content. So again, I would argue that none of those things, none of those social issues are unique to the information technology field. However, the rapid advancements in information communication technologies over the last couple of decades have made those issues very severe, something that definitely has to be addressed by any organization nowadays. To regulate or to address some of those issues, governments across the globe, they develop legislation, meaning laws. Now, a lot of people think that the main purpose of legislation, of laws, is to constrain behavior within a society so there is a minimal harm to its members and its needs are met. So a lot of people think that legislature is about constraining behavior, and this puts a negative spin on legislature. However, it doesn't mean like if you pass a particular law, it doesn't mean that it will necessarily constrain behaviors, let's say, of individuals or companies within a particular area. Sometimes it's the opposite. I mean, those behaviors need to be defined and regulated so that certain commercial activities are actually stimulated. So sometimes lack of legislation, it's something that actually stops a particular industry from developing further, rather than something that constricts that industry from being developed. So legislation, I would say most of the time, it's something that stimulates development and not necessarily constrains it. However, the problem with any kind of legislation in relation to information communication technology is that IT is evolving so rapidly. There are just so many new inventions, so many advancements, that laws inevitably lag behind. So the typical pattern that you see is that a new technology is being created, and then it's been around for a few years and people don't really know what to do with it, whether it's a good technology or harmful technology. And then after some severe incidents, eventually the public turns to the government saying, look, it needs to be regulated. I mean, people are using it in a way that can harm other individuals in the society or the entire society. So that's when the government steps in and decides to introduce legislation. And also, you need to understand that IT is being used differently in different parts of the globe. So the needs of people and the kind of harms that can be created with IT are different, across different nations. Something that makes legislation in relation to information and communication technology a bit complicated, because one law that is applicable to one country may not really work, may not be applicable, may not be well aligned with the culture, with the needs, or with the nature of IT use in another country. Now, a classical case in point is copyright laws. I mean, copyright laws, they differ across countries because a lot of countries have their own philosophical view on producing and sharing digital goods. Some societies believe that intellectual goods should be distributed for free so that the society as a whole benefits. In the United States, copyright laws, not only they're restrictive, they're also very protective of the original author, right, of a particular intellectual product. Something, in my opinion, that is effective when it comes to stimulating innovation, stimulating production of new intellectual products, because people know that if you write a new book or if you write a new song, you know that you will be protected under the law and you can take full advantage of your digital asset, meaning you'll make money out of it and you can become rich. This is something that stimulates creativity and stimulates production of those assets. Also, the growth in information and communication technologies around the globe, not only it affects our lives in various ways, in positive and negative ways, it also gives rise to a number of ethical issues. And managers in charge of IT, of the IS function, they are responsible for those ethical implications. They're responsible for all those ethical issues that their decisions in relation to information technology create. If you ignore ethical issues, as an IT manager, if you ignore ethical issues, then there are a number of potential negative consequences of unethical behavior. For example, for an employee, one can lose reputation or even get fired for doing something unethical, something that is not necessarily illegal, but something that is not ethical, as with that ethical view being defined by the views of a number of other stakeholders. And also for an organization, there could be another set of serious consequences when ethical issues are not addressed. For example, loss of reputation. When a company is doing something that the public belief is not right, is unethical, then they can lose their reputation, they can lose their client base, and as a result of that, they will lose their financial strength, and they will eventually go bankrupt. So sometimes it's a matter of survival. I mean, being ethical is not just a matter of being nice and being praised by certain people. It's a matter of survival nowadays. Now, the first step in addressing ethical issues is to recognize that a decision or action has ethical implications. Again, I would like to make this distinction. There are some behaviors that are outright wrong, and not only that, they are criminal behaviors, right? For example, stealing something, right? In most societies, regardless of which religion they practice, what kind of maturity in relation to copyright legislation they have, I mean, most people agree that stealing something is wrong. Okay. However, there are some issues where, first of all, they are not immediately regulated by the legislature, so you cannot really classify this particular behavior as a criminal behavior. And because of that, it's kind of up to you how to classify that behavior, whether it's something that should be prohibited or something that should be allowed. One demarcation principle that kind of helps you to see whether something is a straightforward decision or an ethical decision is when there are many different opinions about that issue. So if you have like a lot of people who differ in their interpretation of a particular action, it means it's an ethical problem. Moreover, the following questions can be used to identify potential ethical problems. For example, is this fair to everyone that will be affected? If there are different opinions on fairness from different stakeholders, different people, then it can suggest that this is an ethical problem. Then there's another question. Would I want my mother to know about this? Now, Warren Buffett calls this Wall Street Journal effect. It's like a very basic test whether something that you're doing is ethical or not. They're basically saying, would you be if you do something, would you be comfortable reading about your action on the main page of Wall Street Journal? If you're not comfortable about everybody knowing what you did, then it means there's something unethical about your action. If you are comfortable with that, if you don't have any problem with everybody knowing about what you did, then most likely you're making a choice that is ethical. then so basically you can ask yourself, would I care if everyone knew about this? What would be the result if everyone did this? This is, I think it's kind of hinting at the so-called golden rule or golden principle that is found in the Bible and many other religions. So there's this issue. How would you, if you're doing something, how would you feel if everybody started doing this, and also, whatever you do will be applied to you, right? So if you decide to fire a particular employee based on a certain action, then ask yourself, how would I feel if everybody would do this, and how would I feel if somebody did this to me? Would I feel okay about it? I mean, would it look fair to me or not? If the answer is no to any of those questions, if you don't want everybody else to do this, if you don't want this to be applied to you, then most likely what you're doing is not ethical. And nowadays IT is so pervasive across organizations that IT-related ethical problems have the potential to impact many stakeholders. So you need to think about how certain technologies or certain decisions with respect to IT will impact different stakeholders. On the one hand, when you are trying to assess or evaluate a particular situation or a particular decision in relation to IT, and you're trying to see whether it's ethical or not, or what are the ethical implications of that decision. In a way, it's hard to make an immediate judgment, because in a way there is no universally accepted way to determine whether an action is justified or unethical. Many basic ethical principles, they have come from religious traditions and philosophies, and I think, regardless of somebody's background, philosophical position, or religious backgrounds, some although there is no universal accepted way to determine whether an action is justified or unethical, I think all those traditions, they have a lot of overlap, and there are some fundamental principles that everybody agrees upon. For example, stealing is bad, killing is bad, being unfair is bad. So those principles are clear, but sometimes you get into problems when you're trying to apply those principles, because people may have different ways of applying them to one particular situation. And also sometimes it's made worse by somebody's culture. For example, in some countries, bribery is not considered unethical. It's considered like a way of doing business. For example, in Western countries like United States, bribery is illegal, but somebody can argue that there is still this mechanism. Like, for example, in some cultures, to speed up processing of a particular document or particular application, you pay a bribe. In Western countries, instead of paying a bribe, you pay like a premium processing fee, right? Something like that. Or, in some countries, if there is a legal problem, you pay a bribe to the judge. Well, in other countries that consider to be, I guess, with more advanced legislation in relation to, economic transactions, you don't really pay a bribe, but you hire a lawyer, right? So you pay like a fee to a law firm. So, so here we have like a very simple situation that, we have bribery, but some people may have different interpretations of what it means to bribe somebody, right? And some people will argue about it. So sometimes, although those principles are well accepted, they're hard to apply, because there can be many interpretations in how those principles should be applied. Now, to address this problem that there can be like many judgments, many principles, some IT-related organizations, they develop explicit policies in relation to ethical behavior. For example, IEEE have their own, guidelines. They have their own policies in relation to ethical behavior. So here we have a code of ethics from an organization called ACM. A lot of people in computer science belong to this organization. In my field, which is largely management information systems, there is something called AIS Code of Conduct. AIS stands for Association of Information for Information Systems. So those code of ethics, they go into the specifics to eliminate some of the ambiguity in applying ethical principles, and making sure that all members are on the same page. And sometimes those organizations, they say, if you're joining our organization as a member, you also agree to comply with those ethical guidelines that our organization have developed for its members. Yeah, so as I was saying, ethical reasoning, it's sometimes, most of the time, it's not difficult, because some violations, they're just like outright wrong, and most people would agree with them. But some problems are so complex that the decision is not obvious. And the reason the ethical decisions are not obvious is that there are many alternative actions to consider, and there are different alternative opinions and interpretations about this issue. But nevertheless, despite this complexity in organizations, managers should identify ethical problems and include all parties who are affected by the decision. Now, that's like a very robust and universal way of doing with ethical issues. You see, sometimes you cannot address everybody's concerns, sometimes you cannot comply with everybody's expectations and ideas, but at the minimum, you should consider those different ideas by different stakeholders so that at least you know about them and nobody can say that you ignored concerns of a particular stakeholder. Okay, so this completes part one of our video presentation on chapter 15. Thank you for listening.